A futile tenet that we are beset by a Ponzi scheme cannot possibly save us in the court which will now judge the obstacle before the Titanic purported banking systems which have been imposed upon the world. Nothing less than our perfect understanding of their deception and its consequences will save us now. Nothing less than your understanding of this inevitable defeat of the very principle by which the banking system obfuscates our promissory obligations into falsified debts to the purported banking system can make you understand either that there is no justification for interest, for no property of the bank is even at stake, and that indeed the inherent circumstances of a promissory obligation are instead to retire paid principal from circulation. Our freedom of information challenge to the Bank of England is therefore the very argument and case which will sink every purported banking system in the world. That will never happen, however, while the best you can do is to mutter Ponzi scheme. I reported on this freedom of information appeal to the Bank of England last week. I'd like to read the bank's most recent response, but before I do, I'd like to refresh our memories, even though I explained these things in detail last week. We submitted 4 questions to the Bank of England. They again are: what lawful consideration do you claim the Bank of England gives up when it creates money? I ask you if these are unintelligible questions as I read them again. What lawful consideration do you claim the Bank of England gives up when it creates money? Is that an unintelligible question? The second question is, how then does the bank, or does the bank, claim there is a debt to the bank? Is that an unintelligible question? Of course, if the bank doesn't give up lawful consideration, there can't be a debt to the bank. So they are obvious questions. Our third question was, what is the claim to interest then, when the bank can do no more than absorb the costs of merely publishing evidence of our promissory obligations to each other? What is the claim to interest if the bank is only publishing evidence of our promissory obligations and, according to the answers of the first 2 questions, has no property even at stake or supposedly at risk? Neither is this question unintelligible. Our fourth question was, how is it possible even to maintain a vital circulation without accumulating inevitably terminal sums of debt? Well, this question might be more difficult to understand, but certainly it's not unintelligible, because if it were unintelligible, we could not even explain it. Of course, it's asking for the bank to explain and to justify even its obfuscation of our promissory obligations, the consequence of which is inevitably terminal. As I have explained over and over and over again, it comprises an implicit obligation to maintain what I've called rightly, a vital circulation, with the only practical and plausible way of so doing being to borrow principal paid out of circulation back into circulation as new debt equal to the former sum of debt, and making it mathematically impossible, therefore, to pay down the sum of debt, while what interest we pay out of circulation and are forced to reborrow back into circulation to maintain a vital circulation, therefore perpetually increases the sum of debt by so much as ever greater sums of interest on an ever greater sum of debt, until, at an inherently escalating rate even, we suffer the present terminal failure. This is the very principle that the economic models that I provided to the Reagan administration used to project from 1983 and 4 numbers that the present failure would transpire at approximately 2010 AD. Those models even predicted the present de-escalation of interest rates, because interest rates are necessarily de-escalated the whole while that we can survive this long. And of course, the reason that the banking system does this, so even though a maintenance of elevated rates are its real interest, however unjustified, is that that's the whole purpose of banking. So they have done this, what we see around us, as a consequence of actually dealing with the fact that their system of exploiting us is indeed terminal. So now, having read those questions, I would like to refresh our memories a little bit here that the bank's first response sent us to a couple of links, Bank of England pages. I cited these in the previous program, but there isn't a word in all the documentation cited which even refers to a possible fact that the Bank of England even considers it important to explain whether or not they give up lawful consideration, or that their obfuscation of the currency isn't terminal. There isn't a word, not a word, in any of the documentation cited or purported answer provided in the bank's first response that answers any of these questions. So we again responded, clarifying our questions further, explaining how they weren't answered, even giving the only truthful, correct answers for the bank even to dispute them, if it so chooses, which of course would be a very important thing to do if someone is basically proving that their obfuscation is terminal, that it's the cause of the first Great Depression, the second Great Depression, and what will be a third and a fourth and a fifth, or however many further depressions, if we don't get these questions answered and resolved into a proper economy which indeed serves the subject public, which may or may not be, of course, even an interest, a genuine interest of the Bank of England or any other purported banking system of the world. Because, of course, the very whole purpose for the banking systems is to impose this obfuscation of the currency upon us. So, in response to our meticulous accounting for all the issues and in providing answers, even for the only truthful answers for the bank even to dispute them, the bank still refuses to respond. And this is what they wrote back. Mark Giles of People for Mathematically Perfected Economy UK has submitted this appeal on our behalf. So, being a citizen from the UK, they are responding to him, to Mark. Dear Mark Lee of the Giles family, thank you for your further email dated 29th of June. I thought I had answered your earlier questions in my letter dated 16th of May. That said, I was giving answers that relied on interpreting your questions because, as you have written them, I find them unintelligible. This is after the first appeal, of course. It carefully explained our questions, where they were going. We're not even trying to strategize in some undisclosed way. We're even explaining how we're headed, where we're going with this, if they cannot invalidate our case, which evidently they can't. He continues, the same applies to the two immediate questions in your latest email. Well, those two immediate questions, to refresh your memory, were simply that we said, do you still hold, after we gave the answers to our 4 questions, the only truthful answers, and even explain how those are the only truthful answers. Do you still hold that the bank gives up lawful considerations? And he's still saying that that question is unintelligible. We simplified the 4 questions into one. Do you still hold that the Bank of England gives up lawful consideration? And we explained that to be something of commensurable value equal to the debt that it claims. Of course, it claims a debt to itself. That question had been asked as well. And yet he hasn't even provided an answer to that, saying that these things are unintelligible. Imagine that. He goes on to say, if you wish to proceed with this Freedom of Information Act request, please could I ask you to reformulate your questions in such a way that they are a clear request for recorded information, and he adds in parentheses, which is what the Freedom of Information Act gives you a right to ask for. Close parentheses. So now he's introducing a restriction on what he will answer, which of course then prevents him from giving up any position that the bank may hold if it isn't in some recorded information. Not to worry, we account for this in our further response, which I'm about to read to you. Regarding the rest of your email, please may I draw your attention to the whatdotheyknow.com advice. Why must I keep my request focused? And he provides a link for that, which says, please do not include arguments about your cause. As such, I have not focused on what you have written in the rest of your lengthy email, although I am content to confirm that the web links I gave in my 16th of May reply were indeed intended to take you to the 2 pages that you have identified in your 29 June email. So all he's saying is that those links that the erroneous links that he provided were intended indeed to take us to the 2 pages that don't answer any of these 4 questions. So this is the bank's reply. Of course, this does not answer any of these questions. So in response to this, I've formulated a further reply, and I'd like to read that to you now. I drafted our response to this Bank of England reply over our 4th of July holiday here. So it's dated July 4th, 2011, although it wasn't posted until a couple of days later. July